Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is our first career talk of the year. We're so excited. It's going to be wonderful. And I wanted to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Favilli. They are co-founders of Favilli Studio in actually South Pasadena, right? South Pasadena. Their studio is an entertainment tourism design firm with more than 30 years of experience on projects in North America, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Mr. and Mrs. Favilli attended Art Center College of Design, which is very close to here, where they originally met. After graduating with distinction, Mrs. Favilli embarked on her design career as a creative director at Maddox and Company in Santa Monica. Mr. Favilli's life is steeped in the arts. His mom was a ballerina for Portugal's National Ballet, and his father, a noted sculptor, motion picture art director, and Mattel's art director. He began his career as a senior concept artist at Walt Disney Imagineering. Later, he left Disney to establish Favilli Studio. The Favillis have one son, Alessio, in the 7th grade at St. Monica Academy. And Mr. Favilli now teaches art to our 7th grade students, for which we're very grateful. So let's give them a very warm welcome and all of our attention.
We're going to just get this out of the way, and we're going to start with just a brief presentation, and then we'll get into some of the discussion. You guys look very closely at this picture. Do I even need the mic? Can you hear me without the mic? All right, we'll use the mic. If you look at this picture very closely, you'll see Mr. and Mrs. Favilli right there. That's our graduation picture from 1986.
Well, you weren't supposed to say here.
It's right up
It
there.
was from a while ago.
When we graduated from Art Center and began our creative careers. But we thought you'd get a kick out of seeing what that moment in our life was. So when we were asked to speak to you about our careers and to position it in a way that also demonstrated how the arts, or a life in the arts, can actually be something really practical, meaning you can make a living at it. We thought that we would give you a chance, first of all, to see what we looked like when we graduated, because I look a lot better then than now. I didn't have hair, and she looks exactly the same. But we wanted to give you a sense of some of the work that we've worked on in the last 30 years. And it kind of spans a breadth of different kind of sectors of industries, starting with what we call communications design or graphic design. And goes into a lot of packaging design. Think about just about every product you buy, someone had to design it. If you've been to a Disney park, except for Shanghai Disney, you've probably been in something or experienced something we've helped to create. And if you've been in what are called thematic resorts, a good example is the Venetian in Las Vegas, which we were involved with right from a blank sheet of paper until it was built. Then you're experiencing some of our lives. Mrs. Halpin mentioned that my father was a very distinguished sculptor. One of the things that fundamentally roots me with all of our work is sculpture, which I got from him. Actually, you'll see down here, I'm hoping to pass it on to Alessio. This was Alessio at the unveiling of this monument. It's called the 5 Points Project for Burbank. And he signed it with his hand. So that kind of gives you a snapshot into who we are. And we wanted to also share with you some of what other people have talked about or expressed when they're talking about design. This is a very famous quote by Walt Disney. You can design and create and build the most wonderful place in the world, but it takes people to make the dream a reality. Walt Disney, what you know of the Walt Disney Company, would have never happened had it not been for the incredible army of creative people that were involved in the Walt Disney Company. And people think that that would only be an animator or an actor or an actress. But in reality, within the Walt Disney Company, like for instance, when I was at Walt Disney Imagineering, there was over 200 departments, from lighting designers and engineers to architects, costume designers, interior designers, and on and on and on and on and on and on. So some very, very influential people creatively in our world, in our cultural world, believed very much in the power of design, but also believed and understood the need for a workforce to create and make those dreams into a reality. Now, if any of you want to kick in here at all? Okay. You're going to find out I do most of the talking. She just kicks me if I did something wrong. But for any of you who are considering a career in any kind of endeavor that is creative, you're probably at a disadvantage unless your parents are really open-minded. There's kind of a false perception, it's not kind of, it's a real perception that to go into the arts means a life of torture and strain and struggle, and you're going to end up poor and you won't be able to make a living at it. Well, let me talk about the reality of what we call the creative economy. This is very real. The creative industries are the heartbeat of the world's economy. They contribute to growth, employment, and well-being. And while that sounds like a really wonderful and kind of inspiring and uplifting quote, the numbers is what backs this up. So this is according to a recent study that was done by the World Economic Forum and Ernst & Young, 2019, March of 2019. Globally, the arts, the economy, the creative economy represents $2.25 billion in annual revenue. It's 3% of the world's GDP. It means the total output of everything humanity creates, 3% of it is arts-based. 29.5 million jobs, which employ about 1% of the world's active population. So it's a huge, huge opportunity. In the USA, the numbers are amazing. Almost $1 trillion, $804.2 billion every year is the annual revenue from creative arts-oriented industries. That's 4.3 of our country's national GDP. Arts and culture, what we know, contribute more to the economy than construction, mining, utilities, insurance, and the hospitality industries combined. It's a massive, massive place where there's a lot of different opportunities for people that are creative. In California, which is known as kind of a creative state globally, $407.1 billion in annual revenue. And there's this notion, direct, indirect, and induced. It means that there is a direct opportunity for people that want to go into some form of the arts. And then there's indirect opportunities for that, and then there's also induced, which means the things that let's say you went out and you created some amazing creative project. Induced means that that project probably will inspire or spawn other projects like it to be created, all creative. 1.6 million jobs, direct, indirect, and induced. 789,000 jobs, direct jobs, are out there in the workplace every year that are in the arts. So it's a huge opportunity. Los Angeles, where we are, LA County, $78 billion in labor income every year, just from arts-oriented projects. And we'll show you some examples of what those are in a moment. But we just want you to see that if you're thinking about going into anything creative, let your folks know there's a lot of economic data out there that supports it's actually a pretty good industry to go into, the creative economy. 865,000 jobs, 20% of the county's total employment. So when you see 10 people in Los Angeles County, 2 out of those 10 people on average are working in some form in a creative industry. You guys know who Steve Jobs is, right? Do you all know how Apple Computer started? Anybody have any ideas?
In a garage?
Yep, in a garage. But do you know why Steve Jobs created Apple Computer?
Is he wanting to make the world a better place?
Yeah, that's pretty close. So if you wanted to make the world a better place. Charles, I see you. What?
Because he thought all the other computers that he saw that they were ugly.
Yes? And what else? Do you know anything else about that?
And he liked art.
Yeah. So Steve Jobs kind of just asked himself, this is very good, Charles. You paid attention in class. So Steve Jobs didn't understand why a computer had to be ugly, as Charles so eloquently put it, but he also didn't understand why you had to do 50 things to get something on a screen and it looked hideous. You guys remember sort of, well, you may be young, too young, I don't know, but computers were pretty hideous at one point, and they were pretty difficult to use. Just ask Mr. Fryman. But Steve Jobs, fundamentally what he loved was calligraphy and typography. And he said, why can't a computer, and why, when I use a computer, first of all, why can't it be as easy as writing for me? Think about that, right? For when he said that, because back then computers were very difficult to use. But why can't it be as beautiful as typography, as calligraphy? Why can't I do that? And so he completely based an entire company on that everything that they would do would be aesthetically driven and beautiful, easy to use, user-friendly, and beautiful. And hence, until the time he died, Steve Jobs' main role within Apple Computer was to create beautiful things. That was his breaking the status quo. He also believed very much in design and the power of design and technology fused. And ultimately, he created Pixar from that notion as well, which we also know. So, pretty interesting notion. So, do you want to talk a little bit about some of these? There you go.
So, communication design, what's involved in that? Absolutely anything that you see that communicates to you has to be designed. So, all the way from billboards to packaging, websites, brochures, all the way down to those awful little how-to pamphlets that come in things. If those aren't designed well, you don't know how to use it, right? So a really well-designed, even little how-to steps, I truly appreciate because they help the consumer. So communications design is a very, very broad field, and it has a lot of opportunity in it. The one thing that we hope to impart to you guys during this talk is that if you have any sort of creative bent to you, if you feel creatively inclined, there are so many opportunities out there that I wish I had known about when I was your age. My mom had a friend who was a graphic designer, so that's what I thought I should be because she does that. I kind of like the arts, so I'll go into that. And it really wasn't until I got to college that I realized that there were so many other avenues out there. But it's not too late because your careers are not linear, they're very circuitous, and you start one place and you'll always come around to a different place. A huge field right now is user interface. And think about everything from your phone to now cars that are becoming totally computerized, to your iPads, to heads-up displays, to in the medical field, there's a lot of heads-up that's starting to happen. All of that has to be designed. And that doesn't happen by an engineer. It happens by people who are artistic and who are creative and who are designers. Publishing. This is a ginormous field and part of that creative economy. And even though there's a lot of digital, print is still huge. Graphic novels, both for kids, for adults, books, magazines, they're not going away quite as quickly as I think some people predicted they would go away. So that's a big field, and some people specialize only in designing book covers or magazine covers, or only designing magazines. But that's an enormous field in design. Textiles, I actually think I would have preferred to go into this, because when I see textiles, I get so excited. Patterns and colors and everything from rugs to carpeting to fabrics to car fabrics to clothes. Textiles have to be designed, and I actually, in trying to find imagery for this, I started to do some research, and I was surprised to find that even places like UC Davis and normal or regular colleges, not art colleges, have textile programs, because it's an enormous field. You know, no matter what computers will be able to do, they won't be able to design, and they won't be able to respond to how people feel and what the trends are, what color trends are. You'll always need people to be able to come up with patterns for a whole myriad of things. So textiles is a huge field. Fashion. Absolutely everything you wear, and I used to give tours at Art Center because I was on scholarship, and I tried to tell very skeptical parents that everything you come in contact with from the moment you wake up in the morning is designed. Your shoes, your clothes, your toothbrush, your brush, your plates, your glasses, the chair you sit in, everything is designed. I mean, we look at the big stuff like cars and houses, and we take that for, we know that has to be designed, but all these little things, think of Kate Spade. Kate Spade she revolutionized purses because she loved 1950s design. She loved how that looked. She loved how structured it was. She loved how crisp it was. And she basically turned an industry on its head based on that very simple design notion of 1950s. Furnishings. Here again, everything that you use is design, and there's people that specialize in being furniture designers, being chair designers, being ceramic designers, plate designers, utensil designers. You think it's so simple, but it's actually people become very specialized in those industries and in those fields, because it takes a lot to design a well-designed, well-proportioned plate or spoon or cup. How does the cup feel in your hand? Product design. Product design is an amazing field. Again, I think maybe if I had to do it over again, I might have looked into that. If you think about some of the product design that defines a company, look at Dyson. So Dyson, yeah, they did make a vacuum that probably sucked a little better than some, but what differentiated that company from all others was how that vacuum looked. It's a cool looking vacuum. It functions really, really well. It's been designed so that people, all they have to do is hit a button and things fall out or come apart or do something. So Dyson has based, and that's how he started. He wanted to design a better vacuum. That was his whole notion, was design a better vacuum. And that's exactly what they did. And now, I don't know if anyone keeps up on it, but Dyson now has hair dryers, they have hair curling sets, and now they're getting into lighting that's cooled by fans. And he's actually building his first electric car plant. So from a vacuum, because he wanted to design and build a better vacuum, he's now building something like a $3 billion electric car plant somewhere over in, I don't know, where's he from, Germany? I think it's something like that. So product design is a huge field, and actually if anybody has the opportunity to go to Art Center and see any of the shows, I would really encourage you to do so, because they're doing some amazing design there.
How many of you guys stick around at the end of the movie and see how many credits there are that run? A pretty good amount. It's pretty incredible. If you look at an average film, like Iron Giant. Here you've got some stuff from Toy Story, and you've got also Night Before Christmas. Average crew on a film production, especially an animated crew, is somewhere between 800 and 1,200 people. 800 to 1,200 people, and every one of them in some capacity is creative oriented. And that's from the writers, to the animators, to the visual development artists, to all of the different compositors, pipeline guys, tech guys. All together, they represent one big cohesive team to make one of these things happen. And each one of their roles, when you take a look at a film the next time and you're looking at those credit rolls, look at all of the different categories of jobs that are in the making of a motion picture. And it continues. Within making a motion picture, before a motion picture is ever made, at the very beginning, it's what's called pre-production. There is production design, and a production designer assembles an art department, and depending on the size of the feature, the art department could be 3 or 4 people, or it could be a couple of hundred, depending on how many different teams are working on it. But production design is everything you can imagine that comes into play in the making of a movie. A production designer comes, he grabs a script, and he sees the vision of, or tries to understand the vision of a director, and then he employs a litany of artists, set designers, costume designers, makeup people, visual effects people, sculptors, blah, 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 grips, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. Every one of them is part of the creative economy. Media. So one of the most extraordinary things, and it's because of technology, believe it or not, there's a couple of adults besides us in the room who will tell you that when we were your age, there was, depending on the TV set and the reception, you had either 10 to 13 channels. That's pretty much it. No remote control. You had to get, well, actually there was the clicker. It like clicked. I mean, it actually clicked. But there was not the amount of distribution of content that there is today. The creation of media, and I'm sure you recognize a couple of these. Companies like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, Disney, now Apple, who is just stepping into this market, and about 500 others worldwide. They spend upwards of $200 billion a year to create new content. Just there, new content. This is where our company is actually moving to, and what we're working on more and more and more, because there's a lot of opportunity in it creatively and also to make a living. Theatrical releases. How many saw Lion King on stage? Any of you guys? Yeah? Pretty neat, huh? All of that had to be designed. When you guys do one of your wonderful productions here at St. Monica Academy, how many creative people are involved in the creation of that production, right? To support the actors when they're on stage. Experiences. Experiences is everything from halftimes for Rose Bowls, to rock concerts, to special cultural events that might happen. Like, you know, a pretty big cultural event that just happened about a month and a half ago at the Rose Bowl was that the Rolling Stones were in town. When the Rolling Stones roll into the Rose Bowl, there's probably an army of about 1,000 people that have to actually be involved to make that production happen. So there's a lot of creativity that goes on in the creating experiences. We talked a little bit earlier about parks and resorts. The average team, like for instance, this is some of our work here in the left-hand corner where we worked on Splash Mountain in several different Disney parks. The average team, that wasn't just us. We were just one small part of that project. The team for Splash Mountain was almost 1,200 people. And it included not only the designers, the writers, the stagers, the animatronic engineers and programmers, the engineers for building the facility, the architects, but also the contractors. So a lot of, when we talked about induced or indirect association to creative projects, the parks is a good example because once that design is on paper and it needs to be built, a lot of other people are engaged into the process. How many of you have gone to Disneyland and seen the new Star Wars? Anybody? Oh, a few of you guys, what you think? Pretty cool, right? So, Star Wars, from a blank sheet of paper at Disneyland to its realization was about 7 years. And it was about 6,500 people that worked on that project to go through what you all experienced. They are all, every one of those individuals, part of the creative economy. Landscape and landscape architecture we don't normally associate as part of a creative industries. But believe it or not, this is one of the most important aspects of urban design and urban planning. And even if you go back for a moment to the parks, Disney worldwide is known for its landscape architecture. It's one of the most beautiful places you can visit. Water. Did you guys realize that even water has to be designed in some fashion? And it's as dry as if you went up to Lone Pine and took a look at the water display at the Lone Pine Visitor Center, where Doheny brought in water down from the Owens Valley to LA. It can be as dry as that to spectacular water experiences that have been created all over the world by water engineers. They call themselves hydro engineers. They're not dam makers. They actually play with water all the time to create these beautiful experiences. They're all part of the creative economy. Lighting. Most people don't realize that lighting is a big aspect of design and that there's a huge industry for it. Incidentally, when we work on projects, especially if they're placemaking or experiential oriented, like for instance in a Disney park, lighting is one of the most powerful tools a designer can use to evoke emotion, to actually make you feel what it is that we would like you to feel when you are going through that experience. So, big part of the creative economy and architecture, which most people associate with folks that design buildings, but architecture can also relate to buildings that end up looking a lot like sculpture. And interior design, another really, really important part of the creative economy. Interiors is very important because if you think about it, next to what you wear, the thing that you come into contact most on a daily basis is an interior space. When you're outside, you see the building, but you live inside the building. So this is a very big part of the creative economy. One of my favorites is automotive design. When Cammie and I were at Art Center, this was one of my favorite places to hang out because the automotive designers were unbelievable draftsmen, very good at drawing. And we had a mutual friend of ours, his name was Frank Stevenson. And Frank would be best described as kind of a loner, not very vivacious. Worked at a hardware store in South Pasadena to help him put himself through school. But ultimately, when Frank left Art Center, he went on, and after about 8-9 years, he kind of resurfaced in Cam and I's life, and what we realized was Frank was who BMW had put in charge of reinventing the Mini. So every time you see a Mini out on the roadway, think of Frank. And then Frank went from doing the Mini to doing a couple SUVs for BMW, and then ultimately became the head of design for Ferrari and Formula One, the very first American to do so. The Italians would never give that thing up, but he became the first guy to do so. And it all started by him studying automotive design at Art Center. 20 minutes from here.
Well, and I also wanted to relay a story. We have a friend, she graduated in environmental design, which is all about designing things out in the environment. And through a series of friends and jobs and other things, she ended up at Toyota, I think it was Toyota, no, it was Volkswagen, doing forms and finishes. So think about the interior of a car and the exterior, the colors and all the forms and finishes and materials all have to go together. Well, from that job, she heard about a new company startup, and she basically was in charge of the colors, materials, and finishes at Tesla when it first started. So, and every time I talk to Nancy about it, I'm like, I want to be you when I grow up, because I loved cars when I was younger. I always subscribed to Auto Week and Car and Driver, and I just loved cars. And to think that, you know, she went from being an environmental designer she traveled the world to find wood and leathers and materials for the first Teslas that came out. I mean, that was basically her job, to come up with color palettes, materials, and the whole package for how that car looked as far as color and finishes. That was her job. So, great job.
I was just going to add, and she basically created the aesthetic that is Tesla today. So she had a huge cultural impact on modern society by her creativity. So automotive design is a big deal. Technology, handheld devices, this is only going to get exponentially more and more and more. This is kind of extraordinary because honestly, it really wasn't that long ago for us that none of this existed. And you live in such an amazing age technologically, and that's going to be reflected with devices which they all have to be designed, because it's no longer, when cell phones were first out, it didn't matter what they looked like, and some of them were pretty hideous, especially the Motorola phones. The status symbol was that you had a cell phone. But then Steve Jobs came along and said, no, I don't want an ugly cell phone. I want something that people look at and go, wow, what the heck is that? And so technology devices, if you've noticed in the marketplace, have become fashion statements and accessories. And this is just going to exponentially continue to grow, especially when technology starts to fuse with textile and patterns. And a last example for you is aeronautics. Most of the exciting development work that's going on in space tourism, space exploration, is being led by people who are design-oriented, engineering-minded. The engineering is not what is leading the charge, it's the design or the experience that is leading the charge in the development of these technologies and beyond. And with this is just a sampling. What we want to try to convey to you is that in the creative economy, there is an infinite amount of possibilities as to where you can take creativity and apply it in a way that it can become an opportunity. How many of you know who Mike Rowe is? A couple of you guys? Okay, he's a television personality. He did a show that became quite popular called Dirty Jobs. And Mike Rowe talks about something that we both believe in, but that applies to the creative economy. Mike Rowe talks about that this thing called the dirty truth. And the dirty truth is that a lot of young people are encouraged either by their families, their schools, or culture to follow their passion. And that sounds really great. I don't know about you, but when I was your age, I don't know about you, Cam, but I think I know the answer. I had no idea what my passion was. I kind of had interests. Mike Rowe said, well, that's the dirty truth, is you shouldn't follow your passion. What you should do is figure out what you like, or what you're leaning towards that you like. Follow the opportunity that most closely nestles next to that like, and bring your passion to it. It's a whole different thing, right? So when we talk about the creative economy, and that there's this infinite undefinable amount of opportunity out there creatively for you, look for what nestles and appeals to you. Don't try to look at something and say, this is what I love and this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life because this is my passion. Look at that thing and say, is there opportunity? Can I, after I get out of school, make a living doing this? And will I enjoy it? And will it be something that I really want to bring my passion to because I love it, because I like it? You have any thoughts on that? And with that, we're here for some questions. You guys have any questions? I'm going to trip on this.
Yes.
So I guess we were describing Dyson, I think you said?
Yeah.
How he may have wanted to go a new vacuum.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what are the main differences between, or what is the differences between design and like engineering or like inventing something? Because when I think of design, I think of
question? Did I answer it? Did you guys hear his question? So, and I'll recap it. But basically, what is the difference between design and engineering, or design and invention? Is that correct? So, there's this wonderful thing that you all have called an imagination. So, an engineer or an artist are equally equipped, because of their curiosity, to use their imagination to come up with an idea, right? And it could just remain that. Design is the vehicle that is used to take that idea from something that is just in your mind or in your heart and turn it into something very practical. Now, if it's well designed, well engineered, well fabricated, well made, in America, that's called innovation, and that's a different thing. So innovation lurks more into the realm of engineering, fabrication, manufacturing, production. Design kind of nestles closer to the imagination side, but both are definite residents of the creative economy. And I would argue that engineers are pound for pound as creative, if not more creative in some ways, than an artist might be. Because they look at the world in a very pragmatic way. Now, how do I make this work?
Well, and I think Dyson was probably a real visionary because, you know, there's engineers that want to make something suck better, right? I want to make this vacuum suck better. But Dyson said, I want this thing to also look better. And he wanted it to be cool. So if you really think of the first Dysons that came out, they were so incredibly different visually looking from anything else on the market. And they had some pretty hip colors, they had cool materials. So Dyson was kind of that perfect storm of people that knew the importance of making it function really well, but look amazing.
No, you're welcome. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, so this is more personalized, but I'm about to start designing the hairstyles for Julius Caesar, and I'll be like in charge of hair crew there. What would be a field that would be, not necessarily in film, because I'm not a huge fan of like the Hollywood thing, but what would be a practical field that would be geared toward that sort of thing?
So if it wasn't entertainment oriented, a stylist, a visual stylist, pick up any magazine, especially a lot of the fashion magazines, and look at the pictures or the cover pictures, and you'll see credits for who was the photographer, who was the makeup, who was the wardrobe, and who was the stylist. The stylist is the person that basically art directors or agencies will bring in to basically give a look to the shoot, or give a look to whoever's the hair, the makeup, the fashion, all of that.
Yeah, every photo shoot has a hairstylist, and they're independent people. They don't all work as a big pack. You know, they have their makeups, and then they have their clothes stylists, and then they have their hairstylists. And good hairstylists can really make a name for themselves in the industry. So yeah, and photo shoots or even theatrical productions, designing runway shows, you know, designing the hair for runway shows, people have to do that.
So there's quite a living in it, in hair. Yes?
So,
That way they can hear you.
so I'm actually interested in going into the design industry, and I just wanted to ask if there's a difference between being an art director and a creative director.
For which industry?
Right now, I was just thinking fashion design, but I want to keep my option open. So.
Everybody heard your question? Yeah. So there is a difference. Typically, an art director will work for a creative director. Creative director, depending on, let's say it's in the fashion industry, a creative director, again, more comprehensively, maybe if they're working on a runway show, or if they're working on a collection of clothing, or if they're working on a magazine, the creative director is who's going to have a holistic view of everything that is being done, where an art director might have a very specific role. Like if it was the runway event that they would be doing. The art director is the one that's looking at, okay, what kind of lighting, what kind of tables, how are we going to run the stage, where are we queuing people, and how does it all look and function. But they would be looking to the creative director to help them understand holistically how that fits in their broader term. You have any thoughts? Alessia, I'm curious what my own son's going to ask me.
Another slide, is that, in the other slide, is that Tesla, real car yet, or is it just a prototype?
It's a prototype. It's pretty cool. Either way.
So towards the end, you were saying like how you need to choose a job based on like what you're good at and what you enjoy versus like something you're passionate about. So like how would you know if it's something that you're actually like gonna like? How do you know what's the best thing to do versus like what you just feel passionate about?
Well, I think exploration. So, you know what? There's a big push. Mrs. Favilli and I were a little different than most parents. Most parents, they want their children to get through school, get out of high school and go right to college. And while we don't think that college is a bad idea, we think before you jump into a really expensive college, maybe take 1 or 2 years at a junior college, get all that general education out of the way, and while you're doing that, do a little exploration. Start figuring out what it is that you like. Perhaps even try to work in some of those things and make a little bit of money and tuck it away. And in your 3rd year of college, kind of point your nose to where there might be a school that really will help you hone the skills that you'll need to step into that marketplace.
So that's actually exactly what I did. When I was going to high school, we didn't have this thing now that you had to go to college. I mean, for some reason, I was in Tucson, Arizona, most of my friends got out and they went to work. So I was one of the few people that actually continued on to school. And I went to a junior college and I took everything from psychology to business to fiber design to photography to you name it. I took so many different courses just to try to figure out where I felt I fit. And then that's how I started narrowing down. And when we went to Art Center, there were really only 7 or 8 majors at the time. So it wasn't very specified. So we had a very broad education. So that allowed us actually to, when we got out, to do so many different things. Now, unfortunately, colleges make you try to be so specialized that we feel that it locks you in a little too much. So we always tell people to try to get as broad of an education because your career, like we said before, it's very circuitous. Where you start, it's not a linear path unless you maybe are a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer.
While Mrs. Favilli was talking, the reason I put this slide up is when I was going to Art Center, I was also on scholarship, but I would still call my dad every once in a while and say, hey Dad, I need $500 to finish this project. And my dad would say, that's great, I've got $500 worth of work. Everything you see on that page was work I was doing when I was going through Art Center. Because my dad was head of design and development for Mattel Toys. And so part of the way that I put myself through school was to do industrial sculpts on things like the Masters of the Universe line or the Smurfs, and invent some crazy notions for Hot Wheels. That was how I put myself through school and how I started to figure out the things that I liked and didn't like to do. And because sculpture was something that was kind of ingrained in me, I knew I loved it, but I knew that there was no way I could make a living at it because I'd seen my dad struggle with it, and he was phenomenal. He was like 1,000 times better. So how could I apply something that I loved, like sculpture, in a way that I could still make a living at it? And actually, you could say that He-Man and Skeletor helped pay my way through Art Center. But we would encourage you to explore. Really, like, try a couple of different things. One last thing for you, because this is kind of like a nerve with us. One of our neighbors, their daughter, her name was Lauren, right out of high school went to Stanford. You all know how much Stanford costs? A lot. A lot. And we ran into her mom one day at, I think it was the store, and we said, so how's Lauren doing? And she was going into her 3rd year at Stanford. And she had spent 2 years, and her mom's response was, well, you know, she's doing a little of this and a little of that. She doesn't really know what she wants to do yet. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, $150,000, whoosh, just gone. And she still doesn't really know what she wants to do. So I would encourage you to save the money, explore, try different things. And I thought I said, oh, right next to you.
Okay. I was gonna ask, when you guys said that you were going into didn't you guys say you were going into business?
Into, yes, animation, yes.
What would you say is the most, for you guys, what is the most difficult thing about that?
Do you want an honest answer? Because it has nothing to do with design. It has to do that we live in a godless society. That is our biggest challenge in Los Angeles and in the entertainment industry as a whole. Most people, and you need to know this, and hopefully one day you'll really understand it, but most people that right now are in charge of the formation of the culture that affects you every single day and that has the biggest influence on you, which is media, is very, very godless. In fact, yes, Francis. No, so to answer your question, that is the biggest challenge, is that we feel like we're surrounded most days trying to work with people that don't have the same value systems or belief systems as we do. I was talking yesterday to a very, very successful animation director in Dallas. His name is Brian Ingram, and you may look up, his company is called Brazen Entertainment. Brazen comes from the old biblical kind of reference where they bring their best to the altar of God. He's very, very devout Christian, and he was telling me how frustrated he is because they had just spent about 10 years working on an idea that Netflix wanted to buy. And they were just going through all the different rounds of contractual negotiations, and during that process, they were just about to the point where they were going to sign. Netflix brought in a couple of people who were going to be the creative shepherds of the project as they went into production. Completely against those principles. And what do you think Brian did? Any questions? Or any idea? What? You didn't sign it. That's for, as you get out there and you get into the world of the creative economy, that's probably one of your biggest challenges in the creative economy, is that right now the creative economy operates, and it's an amazing economy, you can see. It's an amazing place to go find opportunity, but you are going to be challenged every single day with your beliefs. Every single day. Yes, Francis? You want me to, do you want to take that one? I've got different opinions, but.
It is really hard. I would tell anyone starting out to work for a company first for at least 5 to 10 years to really learn about the industry, the design, all that stuff. Because when you work for yourself, you have to wear so many different hats. You know, we write our proposals, we do our own contracts. We have to make sure I run to FedEx sometimes if our assistant isn't around. Or, I mean, you know, when you first start out, you think, oh, it's going to be so great working for yourself, but you're the one calling your clients. The invoice is in, you haven't been paid. So you wear so many different hats. You have to be very resilient. You have to be very versatile. And there's no job too small.
You have to be really humble. There you go. One last thing, for any of you who are considering going in this crazy industry, feel free to contact us. Our contacts are through the school. But we've had several students come over to our studio over the last few years with their folks and talk to us about what they would like to do or trying to figure out what they want to do. So feel absolutely free. The studio is a pretty fascinating place. For anybody that's been there, they always come back thinking, wow. So you're all welcome anytime. Just let us know, okay? All right, thank you.